So another epic 7-game series in the NBA playoffs has just concluded. The Golden State Warriors, they have 73 regular season wins, just defeated the Oklahoma City Thunder in 7 games, becoming the 10th team in NBA history to rally from 3-run down in a series and are on to their second consecutive NBA Finals. And before the NBA Finals begins on Thursday, much discussion is being around where this series ranks amongst the best in NBA history. Does it crack the top 5? We'll find out. I'm Larry H. Russell, and these are the top 5 non-NBA Finals series in the history of the playoffs. The only series on this list and of the Bulls-Knicks mid-90s playoff trilogy not to go the full 7 games. However, throughout the Bulls' dominance of the 1990s, Chicago was never closer and more predicted to lose a series in this Eastern Conference Finals matchup against the first seed in Knicks. In fact, this was the only time after 1990 in which Michael Jordan did not have home court in the Eastern Conference playoffs with the Bulls. After the Knicks grabbed the first 2 games of the series in Madison Square Garden, punctuated by a John Starks dunk over none other than his airness himself, many felt that the Knicks were taking the same path as the Pistons and Bulls before them, gaining the necessary battle scars in yearly playoff defeats to a conference juggernaut before finally breaking through. When the series returned to Chicago, the Bulls showed that they were not ready to hand the crown to their Big Apple inferiors, and when Michael Jordan poured in 54 points on Memorial Day, the series was once again anew and set up the all-important 5th game back in New York. In turn, that ended up giving us this.
10, Ewing for Smith. Smith. Stopped again by Pippen. What a play by Scottie.
Not remembered at all for his 50-point game with the Clippers, Charles Smith lives in the annals of devastating New York heartbreaks. Chicago would go on to wrap up the series back home in Game 6. The Sixers and Celtics may have the most fabled rivalry in the history of the NBA, from Havlicek stealing the ball in 1965 to the Sixers ending Boston's 8 straight runs of titles in 1967, another 7-game battle in 1977 conference finals, as well as the blood wars of the early 1980s, heck, even a 7-game series in the conference semifinals in 2012, in which everyone is excused for forgetting about. No 2 teams have played more Game 7s against each other than Philadelphia and Boston, and 1968 was no different. However, this was a series in which no one saw going 7 games, let alone the Celtics winning. As the Sixers were eliminating the Celtics from the 1967 playoffs, the Philadelphia crowd began heckling Johnny Most and echoed chants of "Boston is dead, Boston is dead." Will Chamberlain finally won a championship. The 67 Sixers team is still viewed to this day as one of the best teams in NBA history, and many felt that once they broke that Celtics seal, years of dominance would ensue. This seemingly was playing out once again in 1968 as the Sixers took yet another commanding 3-1 series lead over an aging Celtics team led and even coached by Bill Russell. This was not seemingly the invincible Celtics team of 1960s past. Team leaders Russell and shooting guard Sam Jones were well into their mid-30s, and only John Havlicek was the team's other all-star and only leading scorer on the team under 30. After the Celtics lost Game 4 in Boston, Havlicek took to a chalkboard in the team's locker room and wrote in big letters, "Celtics Pride," spawning one of the league's most identifiable monikers and, heck, even indirectly contributing to this movie. The aging and savvy Celtics would go on to stun the Sixers in Philadelphia in Game 5, seemingly delaying the inevitable coronation for the NBA's new perceived super team. The Celtics would win yet again in Game 6, setting up what was once an unfathomable Game 7 back in Philadelphia. Despite the Celtics rallying to probably tie up the series and conjuring up demons of Philadelphia playoff past, the Sixers were heavy favorites for the 7th and deciding game at home. No way could a vastly inferior Celtics team defeat a Sixers powerhouse for the 3rd time in the series in Philadelphia, right? Wrong. The Celtics would hang on for dear life in the waning moments of the 7th game, with Bill Russell effectively neutralizing his arch-rival Wilt Chamberlain in the moments that mattered most. Wilt attempted just 2 shots in the second half of the final game, and Boston would rally to win the series. Fast forward to more recent times as Tim Duncan and the San Antonio Spurs have been the model of consistency in the NBA for the 21st century, yet have never been able to match the Celtics of the 60s dominance despite being in the thick of the NBA title picture for over 15 years. 2006 was no different and may have been the absolute peak in terms of the overall talent level on the Popovich coach and Duncan-led Spurs teams. Duncan, as well as fellow All-Stars Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker, were at the statistical height of their NBA careers, although Duncan himself was battling plantar fasciitis that season. The Spurs were the defending champs and posted a Western Conference best 63 wins, but due to a quirky rule in division alignment, the Spurs would draw the team with the second-best record in the West that season. The Dallas Mavericks, led by their own stalwart Dirk Nowitzki, in the second round of the playoffs. Many felt the series had the makings of a classic, and it did just that, and then some. Both teams featured talented rosters featuring their own Hall of Fame and All-Star caliber players. It was effectively for the Western Conference, and almost every game was an absolute barn burner, with 5 to 7 games being decided by 2 points or less at the end of regulation. The Mavs ended up getting ahead 3-1 the series, with many feeling that if they were to drop Game 6 at home, then Dallas would have no shot in a potential Game 7 back in San Antonio. In Game 6, it looked as if Dallas blew their opportunity as Bruce Bowen blocked a potential Dirk Nowitzki game-winning basket on the game's final play, setting up the 7th game back in San Antonio, in which the Mavericks did not want. Amazingly, the Mavericks raced to a huge lead in Game 7, leading by 20-plus points nearly the entire game before San Antonio went on a huge charge and then would take the lead on a Manu Ginobili three-pointer, which seemingly seemed to cap off the furious Spurs comeback, with the rocking arena and the Mavericks blowing the series at 3-1, as well as the 20-plus point lead in the game. This one was over. Dallas now had no shot, until Dirk Nowitzki pulled an and one completely out of nowhere, tied the game back up, and the Mavericks would then blitz San Antonio in overtime to capture the series. Lost in the controversy may be one of the most emotionally charged and riveting playoff series in the history of the sport. Similar to the Bulls and Knicks series in 1993, the Sacramento Kings and their brand of basketball, with cunning and crafty half-court passing and backdoor cuts, had a roster stacked of savvy and skilled players with a roster that went nearly 12 deep. Heck, future all-star Gerald Wallace was left for an expansion draft a few years later because even he couldn't garner playing time on a loaded Kings roster, which was so well coached in that it was able to productively use virtually every player on the team. When Michael Jordan retired, Shaquille O'Neal became arguably the most dominant individual figure in team sports, and after hiring Phil Jackson in 1999 to go along with Kobe Bryant blossoming into the league's best wing player, the Lakers began running roughshod over the post-Jordan NBA, winning 67 games and the title in 2000, as well as a dominant 15-1 playoff stretch the following season. As this was going on, the Sacramento Kings were incrementally improving their team, trading for Chris Webber in 1998, adding Vlade Divac, Doug Christie, Bobby Jackson, upgrading Jason Williams for Mike Bibby, getting Peja Stojakovic and Hedo Turkoglu from overseas. And during this, the Kings were seemingly gaining valuable experience in their battles with the vaunted Kobe and Shaq Lakers, even stretching them to the full 5 games in a 1-versus-8 matchup in 2000. And in 2002, the Kings broke out, posting the best record in the NBA and setting up a conference finals which was anticipated all season that effectively decided the NBA title. Despite having the home court, Los Angeles was favored. However, after watching the 3.5 games of the series, it looked clear as day that Sacramento was the better team. After dropping the first game at home, thanks to an over-performance by Hedo Turkoglu, who subbed for an injured Peja Stojakovic, the Kings began decimating the Lakers, blowing them out in LA in Game 3 and took another 20-plus point lead in Game 4. The Kings were about to take a 17-point lead into the half before Samaki Walker, yes, Samaki Walker, threw in a half-court shot at the buzzer that should not have counted, but did, which, side note, became the pivotal example for the NBA's edition of replay review that very following offseason, cutting the lead to 14. LA began chipping away, but never took the lead the entire game until one of the most famous shots in NBA history. Even after the seemingly devastating shot, Sacramento threw a dagger into LA's hearts and looked as if they were about to wrap up the series in LA before everything started to get shady. That perceived fixed game set up a classic 7th game, which was easily the most anticipated and only relevant game in the immediate post-Jordan era. And say what you want about how it got there, but the game lived up to the billing. Played in front of the cowbell-clanging, raucous Sacramento crowd, Mike Bibby nearly single-handedly carried a Kings team which began choking. The Kings shot just 16 of 30 from the line. Sacramento sharpshooters couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, literally, but Bibby put on a performance so admirable that even Kobe had to acknowledge it. He just couldn't do it himself, however. Robert Horry hit more clutch threes, Shaq made them when they counted, and the Lakers won the game in overtime and became the first road team to win a Game 7 in the conference finals on the road in 20 years. The holy grail of all playoff series. You hear the cliches from me of this had it all. Well, this one had it all. As Bill Simmons once infamously wrote, this was rugby allowed to be played out on the basketball court. In 1980, the Celtics shocked the NBA by going from worst to first, but were clearly overmatched by a bigger, deeper, and more battle-tested Philadelphia 76ers team, which had been on the cusp of winning an NBA championship since 1977. The Celtics, while ever so talented, led by their sophomore sensation Larry Bird, were still considered too green and also didn't have enough muscle down low to compete with the real stalwart teams of the league. However, on the last day of the regular season, these two teams met in the Boston Garden to decide which of these teams would win the Atlantic Division and thus get home court if and when these two specific teams met in the conference finals, which of course they did. Boston would go on to win that game, giving a glimmer that maybe, just maybe, they could represent the Eastern Conference in the NBA Finals with their young group. When the inevitable conference finals took place, it looked as if it would be more of the same. However, the Celtics still had yet to acquire the appropriate battle scars necessary to win when it counted, as Philly stole home court on a game-winning free throw by Celtics killer Andrew Toney and took yet another seemingly insurmountable 3-1 series lead as Boston butchered their final possession in a 107-105 loss at the Spectrum in Game 4. In Game 5, the Sixers led by 6 points with a minute remaining before Boston rallied to steal the game. This would then become a trend throughout the remainder of the series. In Game 6, Philadelphia would go ahead by 16 points, and famed public address announcer Dave Zinkoff would then announce to the audience that NBA Finals tickets were to go on sale after the game during a TV timeout. During the game, the physicality and emotion was intense, possibly unmatched from any playoff series in NBA history. As Bill Simmons referred to it as rugby, and who doesn't miss the good old days when players could charge a fan in the stands and only be teed up? Anyways, the Celtics would come back on the Sixers again, taking the lead for good on a crazy Larry Bird shot which hit the front of the rim, then the backboard, then dropped in, setting up a do-or-die Game 7 back in Boston. Despite playing in front of Bedlam on Earth in the Garden, and the referees utterly swallowing their whistles and allowing anything and everything to go, the Sixers again took this time a 7-point lead with 3 minutes left before Boston shut out Philadelphia. The Celtics took the lead on a Larry Bird pull-up, which he banked off the glass with a minute to go. Neither team would score again, and when the final buzzer sounded, it set off a celebration so crazy, Bird himself would get injured in the mob scene. I'm Larry H. Russell, and these were the 5 best playoff series in NBA history.